The call came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and it would change everything. Ramona Vásquez was elbow-deep in a catering order for 40 when her phone buzzed against the stainless steel prep table. She ignored it. She had herb-crusted salmon to plate, a wild rice pilaf that was dangerously close to drying out, and exactly 19 minutes before the Whitmore Gallery's board dinner went sideways. The phone buzzed again, then again. She set down her tongs, peeled off one latex glove, and looked her dispatcher. Gil. Row. Pick up. It's bad. She almost didn't call back. Almost. Gil answered on the first ring. We got a situation. Gil, I'm in the middle of... Fontaine's translator just had a medical emergency. Collapsed in the lobby of the Alderholt. They're saying cardiac. Ambulance is on the way, but the man is unconscious, and he's got a meeting in 40 minutes with the Quan group from Hong Kong and 3 separate delegations, and nobody in that building speaks a word of Cantonese, Mandarin or Portuguese, and Fontaine's people are losing their minds. Ramona set down the phone for a moment and looked at her salmon. Row. She picked it back up. Who's Fontaine? A beat of silence. Elliot Fontaine, as in Fontaine Capital, as in the man who owns half of Lower Manhattan and is currently trying to close a 9-figure deal that's been 18 months in the making. And he needs a translator. He needs a miracle. You speak 6 languages, Ramona. I have personally heard you argue with a French supplier, charm a Brazilian vendor, and once, I watched you read a contract in German out loud while eating a sandwich. That was Dutch. That is not the point. She looked around her kitchen. Marisol, her sous chef, caught her eye from across the prep station. Ramona held up 5 fingers, mouthed "Cover me," and walked toward the back hallway. What exactly are you asking me to do, Gil? I'm asking you to drive to the Alderholt Hotel, go up to the 42nd floor, and translate for one of the most powerful men in the city for. She heard him shuffling papers. Possibly 2 hours. I'm in my work clothes. I know. I have catering whites on, Gil. I have a grease stain on my left sleeve. I know, Row, and you want me to walk into the Alderholt. The man is desperate. She thought about it for 3 seconds, which was 2 more seconds than she usually needed to make a bad decision. What's the rate? Whatever you want. I told them you were the best I had. I am the best you have. I know that. They don't know that yet, but they're about to find out. The Alderholt Hotel was the kind of place that made you feel underdressed the moment you stepped through the revolving door, and Ramona felt it immediately, that particular, specific chill of a lobby that had been designed to make certain people feel small. The marble floors were the color of cream and bone. The chandeliers cost more than her car. A man in a charcoal suit looked up from the concierge desk, took one long look at her 5'4" frame, her round face, her catering whites with the Vásquez & Co. logo on the breast pocket, and his expression did something careful and controlled. "Can I help you?" he said, in the voice people use when they mean the opposite. "Ramona Vásquez, I'm here for Fontaine," the careful expression flickered. "Mr. Fontaine is expecting someone who speaks Cantonese, Mandarin, Portuguese, and 2 others if the evening gets complicated." She smiled pleasantly. "That's me. 42nd floor?" He made a call. She waited, hands clasped in front of her, watching the lobby. A cluster of men in dark suits near the elevator bank kept glancing her direction. One of them was already on his phone, looking stressed in the way that only money problems produce. Not frantic, just tight, like a wire pulled 1 inch past its limit. The concierge hung up. His expression had shifted into something slightly less condescending. 42nd floor. Mr. Fontaine's assistant will meet you. The assistant's name was Perry, and he was 26 years old and visibly unraveling. He met her at the elevator with a tablet in one hand and a coffee he hadn't drunk in the other. "You're the translator?" The way he said it, she knew he'd been expecting someone in a blazer, someone with a business card holder. Someone who looked like what he thought a translator was supposed to look like. "I am," Ramona said. Perry stared at her for a moment that went on slightly too long. Then the elevator opened and he stepped back to let her in. "Okay, so, the Quan group arrives in 32 minutes. They're out of Hong Kong, primary language is Cantonese, but the two junior partners prefer Mandarin in formal settings. That's what Mr. Fontaine's notes say, at least. There's also a delegation from Lisbon, 2 men. The lead is a man named Carvalho, who speaks English but prefers to negotiate in Portuguese when he wants to slow things down. And then there's the German, Ramona said. Perry blinked. How did you know? There's always a German. He looked down at his tablet. Böhm, Gerhard Böhm. He speaks English, but his legal counsel does not. And the contract language. Perry. She looked at him calmly. I've got it. I need 5 minutes with Mr. Fontaine before anyone arrives. I need a glass of water, and I need someone to tell me the 3 things he absolutely cannot compromise on tonight. Can you do that? Perry blinked again. Then something in his shoulders dropped about an inch. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I can do that. Elliot Fontaine was standing at the window when she walked in. Ramona had Googled him in the elevator. 44, built like someone who had played rugby in college and kept most of it. Dark hair, silver at the temples, the kind of jaw that seemed purpose-built for a boardroom. In his photos, he always looked completely in control. Right now, with his back to the door and his hands in his pockets and the whole glittering city spread out 42 floors below him, he looked like a man trying very hard to maintain the appearance of control. He turned when he heard the door. His eyes moved over her uniform, her frame, her face, in the space of about 1 second, and she watched him process the gap between what he'd expected and what he'd gotten. He was good at keeping his face neutral. Most men in his position were. But she'd spent her whole life reading rooms, and she caught it, the slight pause, the recalibration. Miss Vasquez, he said. Mr. Fontaine. She crossed the room and extended her hand. His handshake was firm without being performative. She appreciated that. I understand you have about 28 minutes before your first group arrives. Perry said you need 5 minutes. I'll make it 4. He looked at her for a moment. You speak Cantonese and Mandarin, and Portuguese, and German, though I assume that's the easier one for you. She tilted her head. And French if the evening gets long, and Spanish, though that one's basically at home for me. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was actually thinking, not just pausing for effect. 6 languages, he said. Technically 7 if you count the Brazilian Portuguese separately from European. But that's a conversation for linguists. She sat down at the conference table without being invited to, pulled out the small notebook she always kept in her apron pocket, and clicked her pen. What can you not give up tonight? Elliot Fontaine looked at the chair she'd taken. His chair, she realized a half-second too late, the one at the head of the table. She started to shift. He waved it off and sat down to her right instead. The licensing terms on the Hong Kong development, he said. The Quan Group is going to try to renegotiate the revenue share. They've been working up to it for 3 months. I need it held at 22%, not a point lower, and if they switch to Mandarin mid-negotiation, he looked at her sharply. Why would they do that? Because they think you can't follow it. It's a pressure tactic. They'll say things to each other that they want you to feel excluded from, to make you anxious enough to concede. She wrote something in her notebook. I'll translate everything, even the things they're saying to each other. Especially those. Elliot was quiet again. This quiet was different. My last translator didn't do that. Your last translator, she said carefully, is currently in an ambulance, so we're doing things my way tonight. The Quan Group arrived at 8:40, 4 minutes ahead of schedule, which was itself a power move. Raymond Quan was in his 50s, silver-haired, impeccably tailored, and he greeted Elliot in English with the ease of a man who spoke it perfectly and had decided to use it as a courtesy, not a necessity. His 2 junior partners, Quan's nephew Peter and a man named Sung, were quieter, deferential, watchful. They looked at Ramona the way everyone had looked at Ramona that evening. Raymond Quan said something to Sung in Cantonese, under his breath, not quite under enough. Ramona's pen stopped moving. Elliot glanced at her. She met his gaze for just a second and gave the smallest, most imperceptible shake of her head. Not yet, let it go. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded almost invisibly. The negotiation began in English and stayed there for the first 20 minutes. Ramona sat slightly behind and to the right of Elliot, translating quietly when Kwan's team exchanged words with each other, speaking close to Elliot's ear. Peter just said to his uncle that your revised proposal has a clause on page 11 that benefits you heavily on timeline penalties. He's circled it. Elliot's expression didn't change. But his hand shifted, and he turned to page 11, when Raymond Kwan introduced the revenue share revision. Smoothly, with the practiced ease of a man who had done this many times, he framed it in English. He proposed 20%, smiled, said it was a generous adjustment given current market conditions. Elliot said in a pleasant and completely immovable tone, 22, as agreed in October. Kwan smiled back, and then he turned to his nephew and said, in Cantonese, he'll fold if we present the infrastructure cost argument. His translator is gone. He has no idea what we're setting up. Ramona leaned forward slightly and said, in crisp, unaccented Cantonese, perfectly pitched, completely calm, Mr. Kwan, I want to be sure I'm following correctly. Were you referring to the infrastructure cost as outlined in the original annexure or the revised projection from February? Just so I can translate accurately for all parties. The silence in the room was total. Raymond Kwan turned and looked at her. Really looked at her, for the first time all evening. His nephew Peter had gone very still. Sung was staring at the table. Ramona held Raymond Kwan's gaze with an expression of absolute professional pleasantness. The corner of Kwan's mouth moved. It might have been the beginning of a smile. February, he said in English. We were discussing the February projection. Of course, she said. Thank you for clarifying. Carvalho arrived while the Kwan negotiation was still wrapping. He was warm and gregarious and shook everyone's hand twice, and for the first 20 minutes he spoke perfect, unaccented English and seemed to be enjoying himself. And then, at the moment the conversation shifted to payment structure, he leaned back in his chair, pressed his fingertips together, and said slowly, in Portuguese, I think this is where we need to slow down a little. Ramona translated instantly without missing a beat. Carvalho's eyebrows rose. He looked at her, really looked at her, the same way Kwan had. You speak Portuguese, he said in Portuguese. My grandmother was from Porto, she said in the same language. She used to say that a contract written in a hurry is a lawsuit written in advance. Carvalho burst out laughing. Genuine, delighted laughter. He said something to his associate. She caught it, a quick aside. She's the real one in the room, this one. And then he settled back in his chair with the posture of a man who had decided to stop playing games. Tell Mr. Fontaine, Carvalho said, still in Portuguese, though his voice had warmed considerably, that I like his translator better than his original offer. Maybe we can talk about a real number now. Ramona relayed it. Elliot's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. Tell Mr. Carvalho. Elliot said, in English, his eyes on Ramona, that his instincts are correct on both counts. Gerhard Boehm was the last to arrive, and he was exactly what Ramona had expected. Precise, formal, a man who treated language the way a surgeon treated instruments, with careful, deliberate purpose. His English was excellent. His legal counsel, a compact woman named Adler, spoke none. Every time the conversation needed to shift toward specifics, penalty clauses, audit rights, intellectual property definitions, Adler would produce a document, point to a line, and wait. Ramona translated. Adler would look at the document. Then she would look at Ramona. And at some point in the first hour, something shifted in the woman's expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of professional acknowledgement, a recognition. Adler knew the difference between someone who could order at a restaurant and someone who had read German contract law. At one point, Adler wrote something in the margin of her document and slid it across to Ramona without looking at Elliot at all. Ramona read it. Her stomach dropped slightly. She made a note. During a brief recess, someone ordered coffee. Perry materialized with an impressive selection of pastries. Ramona stepped close to Elliot and said, quietly, Adler flagged a clause in Section 7. The way it's written, there's an ambiguity in the indemnification language that could be read two different ways under German law. She's not trying to sandbag you. She's telling you it needs to be cleaned up before signing. Elliot looked at her steadily. How do you know she's not trying to sandbag me? Because she wrote it in German and handed it to me, not to you. She paused. She wanted me to understand it, not you. She's trying to protect the deal. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she was starting to recognize, where he was really listening, not just waiting for his turn to respond. Fix it, he said. I'll need a few minutes with Adler and your contract attorney. She took 8. It was after midnight when the last handshake was exchanged, the last business card pocketed, the last elevator summoned. Ramona sat at the now empty conference table, notepad in her lap, and let herself feel the particular exhaustion that came from spending 4 hours being perfectly precise. Her feet hurt. She'd been standing since 4 p.m. Somewhere across the city, her catering crew had finished the Whitmore Gallery dinner without her, and Marisol had sent her 3 texts, the last of which read simply, "Handled. You owe me cannolis." She was writing a note to herself about the German clause. Specifics she wanted to remember, terminology she'd improvised that she wanted to verify against formal sources. When she heard the door, Elliot Fontaine came back into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her without asking if she wanted it. She found she didn't mind. He sat down, not at the head of the table, but across from her, where Raymond Kwan had sat, and wrapped both hands around his cup. "Where did you learn Cantonese?" he said. "Graduate school," she said. "I was in the East Asian Studies program at Columbia. I had a professor who believed you couldn't study a culture without speaking its language at a competency level. She failed people for tourist-level fluency. And Portuguese. My grandmother." She looked at her notepad, and spite. "My high school counselor told me I wasn't college material, and I should look into vocational programs." She said it in front of 3 other students. I went home and registered for the most academically difficult program I could find in the course catalogue. Ended up getting a scholarship. Elliot looked at her for a moment. He didn't say anything, which she found she appreciated. Most people at this point said something like "good for you" in a tone that never quite landed right. "The German," he said instead. "I lived in Munich for 2 years after graduate school. I worked in a hotel. Not unlike tonight, actually," she smiled faintly. "Rich people in high-pressure rooms needing things translated on very short notice. You went from hotels to catering. I went from hotels to a lot of things." She put her pen down. "I wanted to run my own operation. I like feeding people, and I'm very good at it." He looked down at his coffee. Outside, the city hummed 42 floors below, indifferent and enormous. "The Kwan negotiation," he said. "When you heard what Kwan said, the comment about the translator being gone. You waited." She remembered. The murmured Cantonese. The particular contempt of a man who assumed he was invisible. "He has no idea what we're setting up." "I waited," she confirmed. "Why?" She thought about how to answer that honestly, because the moment I responded, they would have adjusted their strategy. I wanted to know what the strategy was first. Once you knew, they'd already played their hand. He looked at her across the table for a long moment, the kind of look that had nothing performative in it, no charm, no management, just the actual thing underneath. "How much do I owe you?" he said. She named a number. He didn't flinch. He pulled out his phone, opened an app, and sent the transfer. "That's for tonight," he said. "I want to talk to you about something more permanent." Ramona picked up her coffee. It was good. Someone in this building knew how to make coffee, which she approved of. "Mr. Fontaine, Elliot." She looked at him. "You've been in the room for 4 hours," he said. "You've translated 6 separate exchanges, caught a clause that would have cost me a significant amount of money to litigate, and you talked Carvalho out of a 3-point reduction in under 12 minutes. I think we're past last names." She considered this. "I have a catering company," she said. "I have 6 employees, a commercial kitchen lease that renews in March, and a menu for a retirement party on Thursday that I need to finalize by tomorrow morning. I know, I'm not looking for a position." He set his cup down. "I'm asking if you'd be interested in a partnership arrangement. I travel a lot. I work with a lot of international groups who require more than functional translation. They require someone who can read a room in 4 languages at once and make judgment calls in real time." He paused. "I've had 3 professional translators on retainer over the past 5 years. None of them caught what Adler was flagging tonight. She's been trying to raise it for 2 months through back channels." Ramona was quiet. "Keep your company," he said. "I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm asking you to consider adding something." Outside, the city went on doing what cities do at midnight, shimmering and restless and full of the weight of transaction completed and decisions not yet made. Ramona looked at her notepad, at the German terminology she'd written in the margin, at Marisol's text about cannolis. She thought about the hotel lobby, the concierge's careful, managed expression. Perry's pause at the elevator. Raymond Kwan's murmured certainty that the room did not understand him. She thought about the moment she'd answered in Cantonese, and the sound the room had made. Not a gasp exactly, but something close. The sound of a room recalibrating. She had spent most of her life making people recalibrate. "I'd need to see the contract language before I agreed to anything," she said. Elliot Fontaine almost smiled. "I'd expect nothing less from someone who just rewrote mine. And the cannolis are non-negotiable. I have a standing debt, and I take them seriously." This time he did smile, not the managed boardroom version, but the real one, which landed somewhere behind his eyes and changed his whole face. "I think we can work with that," he said. Ramona Vásquez picked up her pen, turned to a fresh page in her notepad, and began to write.